And then we'll talk about why the Labour Party under Corbyn has become institutionally anti-Semitic.
It has finally managed to Nazify the consciousness of its own victims.
How can you possibly claim to be an anti-racist campaigner your whole life and not recognise the basic tenets of anti-Jewish hate? Corbyn campaigned continuously with the release of 2 convicted terrorists.
This is what Zionism has done to Judaic faith.
Trying to equate Jews with ISIS.
He's been convicted of the blood libel that Jews use the blood of children to make their bread, and you've described him as an honoured citizen.
And I look forward to giving you tea on the terrace because you deserve it.
Which brings me to Hamas. Hamas are anti-Semitic. Their founding charter says the day of judgment will not come about until Muslims fight the Jews, killing the Jews, when the Jew will hide behind stones and trees. The stones and trees will say, Muslims, Abdullah, there is a Jew behind me, come and kill him. It also says they were behind World War II, through which they made huge financial gain trading in armaments and paved the way for the establishment of their state. It was they who instigated the replacement of the League of Nations with the United Nations and the Security Council to enable them to rule the world through them. There is no war going on anywhere without their having a finger in it. Hamas have ruled Gaza since 2007 with brutality, indoctrinating children with their views. This is a clip from a children's TV show in 2007 called Tomorrow's Pioneers on the Hamas-run Al-Aqsa TV.
إنهم أطفال يعني محتلون من قبل اليهود، لكن بإذن الله تعالى نحن سنقاوم وندافع ضد الاحتلال الصهيوني.
إن شاء الله سنقاوم يا سراء حتى ننتصر.
In the clip I'm about to show you, Corbyn praises Hamas and calls for them not to be considered a terrorist organisation. And I shouldn't have to provide evidence that they're a terrorist organisation, but I have to, because Corbyn is actively advocating for them not to be designated as such. Here is a list of suicide attacks, car bombings and shootings, almost exclusively aimed deliberately at civilians in restaurants, shops and buses. Highlighted are the ones where Hamas claims direct responsibility. You can pause the video and read them if you want. The really annoying thing about Corbyn's relationship with Hamas and Hezbollah is that the media completely get it wrong. They almost always frame his relationship as hinging on the fact that he called them friends once, which allows him to spin his answers like this.
You use these words, friends. Now, are you saying they're not your friends? Or are you saying they are your friends?
I'm saying that people I talk to, I use it in a collective way, saying our friends we're prepared to talk to. Does it mean I agree with Hamas and what it does? No. Does it mean I agree with Hezbollah and what they do? No. What it means is that I think to bring about a peace process, you have to talk to people with whom you may profoundly disagree.
People need to see the full speech, because he actually says,
Thank you everyone for being here tonight, and say that tomorrow evening it will be my pleasure and my honour to host an event in Parliament where our friends from Hezbollah will be speaking. I'd also invited friends from Hamas to come and speak as well. Unfortunately, the Israelis would not allow them to travel here, so it's going to be only friends from Hezbollah. So far as I'm concerned, that is absolutely the right function of using parliamentary facilities to invite people from other parts of the world. So that we can promote that peace, that understanding and that dialogue. And the idea that an organisation that is dedicated towards the good of the Palestinian people and bringing about long-term peace and social justice and political justice in the whole region should be labelled as a terrorist organisation by the British government is really a big, big historical mistake. And I would invite the government to reconsider its position on this matter.
calling for Hamas not to be designated a terrorist organisation should by itself make him unfit for office. But then he goes on to describe them as working for peace and social justice. Set aside the hundreds of terrorist attacks, and I don't know why you would, but set aside the terrorism. 2 years before Corbyn's speech here, Hamas violently overtook the Gaza Strip, executing their political rivals, throwing them off a 15-storey building and dragging their bodies through the streets. And it would be remiss for me not to bring up their homophobia and murder of LGBT Palestinians. His words here reflect a deranged, feverish promotion of anything anti-Israeli. This is not an event that tries to bring Hamas and Hezbollah to the debate. This is an event that tries to bring Hamas and Hezbollah to legitimacy. Even the event run by Stop the War Coalition is called Meet the Resistance. Odd that an organisation called Stop the War would host Hamas with swords in their emblem and Hezbollah with a gun in theirs. With that in mind, he's met their leaders multiple times, and there's no evidence to support his claim that he did this to bring everyone around the table. He's never met with Israeli leaders, and in fact he's called for the arrests of Israeli leaders.
This man, the so-called defence minister of Israel, it is disgusting, it is disgraceful. I want to see him in front of the International Criminal Court. Along his friend Ayad Olmert is already in prison apparently. He should frankly stay there because there's other charges to be brought against him, and Zippy Livni and many, many others as well.
Also, don't be fooled into thinking that when he met Hamas it was for neutral dialogue. In November 2010, Corbyn met Hamas on a trip organised and paid for by Friends of Al-Aqsa. Friends of Al-Aqsa are a pro-Hamas group, and their chair, Ismail Patel, has saluted Hamas for standing up to Israel, saying that they are not a terrorist group. Yes, this Ismail Patel. Fellow Labour MP Andrew Slaughter was on the trip. Andrew Slaughter declared it to Parliament. Corbyn did not. That's another time Corbyn failed to disclose donations from Friends of Al-Aqsa. Also on the trip was Seamus Milne, who said a year earlier this about Hamas.
Despite the horrific casualties, Hamas is not broken and will not be broken because of the spirit of resistance of the Palestinian people.
In April 2012, Corbyn met with Hamas leader Khaled Mashal at a conference in Doha. Also at the conference was Hamas terrorist Husam Badran. Badran was responsible for a suicide bomb attack on a disco in June 2001, killing 21 civilians, most of whom were teenage girls. Badran was responsible for a suicide bomb attack on a pizzeria in August 2001, which killed 15 civilians, including 7 children and a pregnant woman. Badran was also behind the March 2002 bombing of a cafe while Jews were celebrating the Jewish festival of Passover. 30 were killed, including many that were Holocaust survivors. Also at the 2012 Doha conference was Abdul Aziz Umar. He helped organise the suicide bombing of a cafe in Jerusalem in September 2003. 7 civilians were killed and 50 injured. 2 of those killed were an emergency room doctor and his 20-year-old daughter the day before her wedding. Later on, Corbyn would confirm this. He appeared on PressTV alongside Abdul Aziz Umar, acknowledging that he had met him earlier in Doha, among other prisoners that were released as part of a prisoner exchange. In the PressTV clip I'm about to show you, he goes on to call Abdul Aziz Umar a brother and questioned why he was ever imprisoned.
Well, joining me now live via the internet is Dr. Abdulaziz Umar, who spent years in an Israeli prison and has been subjected firsthand to their illegal torture techniques. Assalamu alaikum, brother.
Wa alaikum assalam. Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. Greeting to you all.
Brother Abdul, we've asked you to come on today.
I was arrested a few days before the month of Ramadan on the 27th of September 2004.
I met many of the brothers, including the brother who's been speaking here, when they came out of prison when I was in Doha earlier this year. You have to ask the question why they're in prison in the first place.
When this video surfaced in July 2018, Corbyn responded by saying he was talking about the welfare of Palestinian prisoners generally, despite the fact that he was specifically talking about this terrorist who was on the show. Again, denial and non-apology. Grotesquely, this is not the only time that Corbyn has honoured terrorists who have killed Israelis. On October the 1st, 2014, Corbyn attended a ceremony of the martyrs of Palestine and Tunisia, where he was pictured laying a wreath at the grave of terrorists from a Palestinian group called Black September, who murdered 11 Israeli athletes at the Munich Olympic Games in 1972. In the early hours of the morning, 8 terrorists broke into the Olympic Village, finding the Israeli athletes to take hostage. They killed 2, whilst leaving their bodies in the room while they tortured the others. The other 9 hostages were killed when the terrorists, having taken the Israeli athletes to an airfield, threw their grenades into helicopters where they had tied up and bound the athletes inside. Over the next few decades, the perpetrators were famously hunted down and killed by the Mossad. When Corbyn was exposed, instead of apologising and denouncing terrorism, he tried to deny the entire incident, instead saying that he was only there to honour the Palestinian victims of a separate Israeli airstrike in 1985.
So you did lay a wreath?
In memory of all those that died in the 1985 Israeli attack, which, as I've repeated now again, was condemned by the UN Security Council.
Did you lay the wreath?
I laid one wreath along with many other people in memory, as I've said, of all those who died in the awful attack in 1985, which, as I keep repeating, and you seem not to understand, was condemned by the whole world.
However, the memorial to the 1985 strike is in the same cemetery as the memorial to 4 of the terrorists behind the Munich attack. Reporters have actually gone to the site and taken photos showing the canopy under which Corbyn is pictured standing and the 4 Palestinian terrorists commemorated there. The plaque for those terrorists commemorates Salah Khalaf, who founded the Black September group who carried out the Munich terrorist attack, Fakhri al-Amari, a key aide of Khalaf's, and Hayal Abdul Hamid, the PLO chief of security. All 3 were killed by the Mossad in Tunis in 1991. Here is an image of Fakhri al-Amari being commemorated on the official Facebook page of Fatah, saying that he was the one who came up with the idea of targeting the Israeli Olympic athletes, and that he recruited the squad that carried out the attack. Buried next to these three is a fourth person, Atef Basaizo, who was killed by the Mossad in Paris in 1992. Fatah's official Facebook page describes Atef Basaizo as being buried in that cemetery. Also, notice that it appears that Corbyn's wreath is laid under that plaque. Corbyn's itinerary of the cemetery visit likely followed the itinerary of other foreign politicians who visit. The then head of the Palestinian National Authority visited in 2012. Here he is first laying a wreath for those killed in 1985 by the Israeli airstrike. This is then followed by the commemoration laying a wreath for the Black September terrorists, together with praying. Corbyn even wrote 4 days later in the Morning Star that the wreaths were laid on the graves of those that died that day, referring to those killed in the 1985 Israeli airstrike, and the graves of others killed by Mossad agents in Paris in 1991. Those others he refers to is either the 3 perpetrators killed in 1991 in Tunis, or the 4th perpetrator who was killed in Paris in 1992. After these further revelations, Corbyn moved his story to say that there was a wreath-laying ceremony, but that he was present but not involved.
A wreath was indeed laid by some of those who attended the conference of those that were killed in Paris in 1992.
Were you involved in that wreath laying?
I was present when it was laid. I don't think I was actually involved in it.
This is despite the fact that we have pictures showing that his wreath was laid under that plaque, and that we know from the site photos that that plaque commemorates the Munich terrorist attackers. He further tries to hide his extremist actions by saying that his presence was part of an international conference including many foreign politicians, when really the ceremony in the cemetery was a small fringe event attended by only a small handful of the conference attendees. This is why Corbyn features so prominently in the photos from this event. He is in nearly every single one of the photos from the cemetery ceremony on the Facebook page of the Palestinian embassy. No decent politician would have attended this event. And in fact, another attendee at the cemetery ceremony is Maher Taher, a leader of the Popular Front of the Liberation of Palestine, PFLP, which is designated as a terrorist group by the EU. Just weeks after Corbyn is pictured with Maher Taher, the PFLP claimed responsibility for an attack on a synagogue that killed 4 rabbis with knives, axes and guns. Hardly anyone from the conference actually chose to go to the ceremony in the cemetery. And you get a glimpse into Corbyn's mindset when one of the few other people who chose to go is a terrorist leader who was later responsible for killing 4 Jews in a synagogue.
As a Jewish MP wants an apology for your having been there.
No, I'm not apologising for being there at all.
But if you thought this incident couldn't get any more twisted, part of Corbyn's defence that he spins is that we need to commemorate attacks from all sides in this conflict.
I was there because I wanted to see a fitting memorial to everyone who's died in every terrorist incident everywhere, because we have to end it. You cannot pursue peace by a cycle of violence. The only way you pursue peace is a cycle of dialogue.
But there is no evidence that he has been to the memorials of Israeli victims of Palestinian violence. In fact, the relatives of the murdered Israeli athletes said that he's never visited their husbands' graves. They added, "Do not forget, Mr. Corbyn, you will be judged by the company you keep." His language is designed to be a soundbite for his supporters to cling onto and say, "How can this man be a racist? He's a man of peace." But for Jews, it only highlights further his hypocrisy that he never commemorates or honours Jewish victims in this conflict. Here's a clip of Corbyn criticising Israel's right of return policy.
The same country that any person that turns up at Tel Aviv airport claiming some degree of Jewish descent gets a right of return to a place they've never been to, never seen, and have no relationship with whatsoever.
He is saying that Jews have no connection to Israel whatsoever. He's literally denying Jews their heritage. And then there's this clip of Corbyn.
It is disgusting, it is disgraceful. I want to see him in front of the International Criminal Court, along with his friends.
And here he is applauding Dovy Weiss from the notoriously anti-Zionist Jewish movement Neturei Qatar, which is a whole other story in and of itself. Anyway, Dovy Weiss is saying,
"We want a free Palestine. It should be under the Palestinian rule, a peaceful dismantlement of the states. We can live together in harmony. God will help. It will happen. That is the way it will happen."
The only way forward for peace is for the state of Israel to be dismantled. And there's Corbyn in the freeze frame applauding. That's the end of part 2. Here's what's coming up in part 3.
There is a bias towards saying that Israel has a right to exist.
He subsequently blamed Jewish owners of newspapers and TV channels for his imprisonment.
Having lived in this country for a very long time, probably all their lives, they don't understand English irony either.
Corbyn was also an active member of a Facebook group where anti-Semitic discourse was the norm, who called Jews lesions on the forehead of history, calling a Jewish reporter a Nazi concentration camp guard after having learnt that reporter was Jewish.
He has called for Jews to be killed. You embraced him.